Welcome to the Unbranded Leadership Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything about leadership and particularly how we can use it to grow in our leadership journey. I'm your host, Mike DeStefano, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about positive mindsets and particularly the data and research behind positive mindsets and how we can utilize that in our culture as we create it. My goal of this episode is to try as hard as possible to refrain from using feelings or opinions or anything like that, and rather stick to the data and the research that exists out there. Mike DeStefano here with the Unbranded Leadership Podcast. I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsor, Recruit Strength, out of Melbourne, Florida. Recruit Strength is a strength training gym that offers 24-hour access to its members, as well as online and in-person strength and conditioning coaching. For more information or to contact them and get set up, visit recruitstrength.com. So our positive mindsets. This is, like I said, this is something that's very subjective in nature. I mean, we have a lot of opinions, a lot of beliefs about the effects of positivity, about the impacts of positive mindset, and a lot, I hate to say it, but there seems to be more discussions on the effects and the impacts of negative mindset than positive mindset. So we're going to talk about both aspects of that in this episode. So to begin with, I was recently given the opportunity to present a teaching or sermon at my church, and I started off with using basically a method that I typically use at meetings and classes that I teach. And what I do is I tell them that I want them to pull out a pen and a paper, and I want them to write down 3 things that they're grateful for. So I did that at this sermon. I told them to go ahead and write down 3 things that you are blessed with or that you're grateful for. And it's really nothing too crazy. We don't need you to write down like sentences or paragraphs or an entire story. It's just 3 simple things. It could even just be 3 words. And I let them know ahead of time that we're not going to be reading them. We're not going to be digesting them. We're not going to be telling anybody about them. This is just something for themselves to write down. After they do it, we go over and we do the entire sermon or the teaching or the class or whatever it may be. And afterwards, I find that the amount of stuff that they were learning, the stuff that they were given, is better retained and better remembered than when I don't do that. And the reasoning for this and where it came from is there was a study completed in 1978 that basically said that when you learn a new skill or you learn a new information, you're more likely to retain that information and be able to regurgitate that information when you're in a positive mindset, when you have a positive attitude. So an example of this is if for whatever reason I'm coming back, say I'm coming to school and I'm going to take a class, I'm going to take algebra, whatever, math class. And on my way into school, I wake up, the weather's perfect. I get a phone call that, hey Mike, you're getting a raise. Everything's going my way. I had a great breakfast. I get into school. I have a very, very positive mindset, and I'm in that positive emotional state. When I learn that information for an algebra class, when I go to recall that information, it's going to bring me back into that positive emotion. Conversely, if I'm in a negative mind space, I'm going to try to refrain from being able to regurgitate that information. My mind doesn't want to go to that negative place. It wants to be in a positive place, right? So take the same thing. Take a class that you really love. Take whatever it may be, history. Going into that history class, on my way into class, I stubbed my toe putting on my shoe. I got a flat tire on the way, and I found out that I'm getting fired from my job. Well, now I'm in a very, very negative space. So all of that information that I received in the history class now, even if it was information that I really enjoy and that I really like, that information I'm going to be less likely to remember or to regurgitate because of the fact that I don't want to go back to that negative headspace. I think of those positive things, and that's where I want to go to. So getting in line with that, where you have a headspace and a mindset that's positive is going to help you better for learning and for retaining whatever information it is. There's another study that was done at least it was published in 2024 from Educational Psychology Review that talked about the impacts of positive instructors on the learning of students. And what the study basically said was that when you have an instructor, particularly when it was a one-way instructional process, which means there's not that back and forth, there's not that actual student engagement. It was more of the teachers talking. In this case, it was done through like online or Zoom or anything like that. When the teacher's talking and the students just absorbing that information. But the study found that those instructors that had not only a positive mindset and positivity in what they were speaking, as well as the words that they were choosing, but also that enthusiasm that they were teaching, led to much better understanding of the topics that they were teaching. And they compared it to teachers that were monotone or that may just kind of be going through the process of, here's X, Y, and Z. And we've all had those teachers that you just fall asleep as they start doing their introduction. But they found that those teachers, a lot of the information wasn't actually kept. They didn't retain any of that information. But the positive ones, they did retain that information. And on top of it, they were more energetic and more likely to want to tell others about that information. So this goes back to that fact of when we're trying to create a culture of having that mindset, that positivity, and that engagement and that enthusiasm to make it so that not only are people going to want to adapt to the culture, but they're going to want to spread that culture to others. They're going to want to take what they've learned and now teach the next person that. And that's kind of how we start looking at the spread of positivity within an organization, right? So, impact of positivity on the job and morale in particular. So I know I've talked about this a few times in previous podcasts that I just completed my dissertation for Liberty University. And during that, the research study that I did for my dissertation was on the challenges that leaders face in motivating firefighters, as well as the impacts of the morale of a firefighter on turnover intent. So when we start looking at the impact of the positivity on the job, one of the things that I started noticing within the research is that a lot of the respondents, particularly the firefighters, when they were speaking about their leadership, which is their lieutenant or their fire officer, they told me over and over again that the person who had that negative mindset, who didn't want to be there, as soon as they worked for that person, they desired to leave. They didn't want to work with them. They didn't want to work for them. They didn't even want to work in an organization that they worked with. And that kind of shows how important and how meaningful that negativity is. But also conversely, those same lieutenants or same firefighters said that when they worked for a lieutenant who was positive, who was engaging, who really acted like this was the greatest job on the planet, regardless of what was happening in the organization or the department or even that firefighter's lives, if they were going through a relational or a relationship issue at home, or they are having money issues or anything like that, when they worked for the positive leader, they immediately wanted to do better and they wanted to be there. And I think that's huge for figuring out how to build those cultures, how to build that positive and successful culture of growth within our organizations. So a lot of those firefighters that are seeing the negative mindset of that, and specifically the negative leadership, not just the peers, but also the leadership, they were saying that they had a desire to leave the organization, a desire to leave the crew that they were on, and really to almost, a few of them actually said they wanted to get out of the fire service because of that. So we see that the direct leadership of our firefighters is essential to being able to keep the morale at a higher level, as well as to reduce the impact that it has on the organization. And this is one of the topics that kind of is sadly, it's almost a downward spiral. And I can't remember the exact study that I utilized, but it was a study on nurses that was talking about like basically the attrition spiral that occurs, and that when you start having nurses in this organization that were looking to leave, and they started verbally discussing it and openly bringing it up that they were looking to leave the organization, that began to cause stress in the other nurses. And those nurses were like, oh man, if these people leave, then all of a sudden more work is going to be passed on to me. We're going to have a higher workload. We're going to have less people to be able to fill shifts, which means I'm going to have to fill more shifts. And just that discussion of it led to that negative trickle down, to where all of a sudden that person who was just listening to someone else that wants to leave is now looking at it going, well, maybe I should leave too. Well, if this person's leaving and this person's leaving, then I need to leave too. And that's before anybody actually turns in their resignation. That's just purely based on discussion of that they desired to leave. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal, that just those words that they chose to use was enough to impact everyone else's work environment. Now, that trickle-down effect and that negativity spiral that occurs is worsened and exponentially worsened by the fact that when you do have those people that leave, when you have an organization of, say, 100 people, and 5 of those people now quit, and they quit for whatever reason it may be. It doesn't matter if it's because of money or morale or the environment or the job itself. Once you have those 5 people that quit, now you have 95 people that are doing the workload of 100 people in that organization. How do you think they're going to feel? They're going to quickly go, oh, now I'm getting more work put onto me. I'm having to work more hours. Now their positivity or whatever was left of it is now dwindling down until they start to leave. Additionally, as that starts to occur, the word gets out to other people that may want to work there about how bad the organization is and about how bad the environment is, making it less likely for people now to want to even come work there in the first place. So as you can see, that whole situation that was here and doing good, as soon as it starts to drop down, you can see that spiral starting, right? We can see the people starting to leave, and that motivation and that morale starting to decrease and decrease and decrease until there's no recovery from this. And if there is a recovery, it's going to be a very expensive and large undertaking to recover that negativity spiral. One of the other things that I noticed within the study that I had done was that I took all these firefighters and I broke them down into firefighters and their fire officers. So I had the leadership and I had their subordinates. I did interviews as well as focus groups with them. And I did it for purposes of triangulation at first. I mean, not at first. That's really what the reasoning was between the interviews and the focus groups, was for methodological triangulation, right? Different methods of obtaining the same data to make sure that, or the same information to make sure that the data aligned, which is called triangulation of the research. What I didn't expect, though, was that there would be a difference between responses of the firefighters based on not only whether they were in the individual interview with me in the focus group, but also between who was in the focus group with them. So, for example, one of the questions that I asked was, how do you think the morale is of your fire station on your crew? And I will tell you, I want to say I did 21 firefighters and 17 lieutenants. And of the 21 firefighters, I believe 18 or 19 said that the morale and the motivation at their individual station was phenomenal. They said it was great morale. Then when I went back and said, okay, what is the morale of the organization? Again, 18 or 19 of that one said the morale of the organization is terrible. And I'm like, this is interesting that you have so many people saying that the morale at their individual station is great. And this is from different stations. This is groups of people that are different stations in different geographic locations within the same department. So I have 18 or 19 that say that the morale is fantastic at their station, but terrible at the organization. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. The two that said that the morale was terrible at the station level were what was called floaters. And floaters are people who don't have an assignment. They're not assigned to a station every single day. They are basically, they fill in spots. So they will go to whatever position is open at whatever station has an opening, whether it be someone on vacation leave, sick leave, or open position, or whatever it may be. So they don't have that consistent crew. And as I started to dig into it, I noticed that it appeared that camaraderie has such a significant impact on the positive mindset or negative mindset of our firefighters and of our crews. When the crew was able to work together consistently, they were positive and they had great morale. When they didn't have a consistent crew and they were constantly going from one place to the next, they were very negative and had very negative morale, which got me thinking, what's causing this? Why would that occur? Why would that be a thing, that going from station to station would cause a negative morale, especially with a floater that's floating into all these other stations with all these firefighters that just told me that their crew has great morale? Why wouldn't that carry over? Why wouldn't that translate over? So when I started doing the focus groups, I kind of got a realization of what was happening here. So the focus groups, I would bring the crews in together, and the ones that I had already individually interviewed, I would ask them very similar questions in a focus group, in a group setting. And sure enough, the ones when they were together with their crew responded that the morale was good. They said, it is great with our crew, while they were sitting there with their crew. Now, when I took firefighters that were not with the same crew and I put them together in a focus group and I asked the same question, is morale good or bad at your station? Almost unanimously, they said that the morale at their station was bad. And this is from the same guys that just told me in a one-on-one interview that morale at their station was good. But when they were with a group of people that was not from their crew or their family, basically, when they were with people that weren't their regular crew, they immediately went to the negative mindset, and they went to it with, oh, everything is bad, everything is terrible, we don't get paid enough, the hours are terrible, morale is horrible at my station, morale is horrible in the organization. And that started making me think, like realizing, oh, maybe this is why the floaters that don't have a crew consistently didn't see any positive at all, because they were constantly going in as the outsider. And it appeared that, and this is speculation, because there's a million more studies that should be done on this to really confirm this and find the causation of this. But from speculation standpoint, which I said I wasn't going to do too much of, but this is part of the research. From speculation standpoint of this, it appears that the crews automatically go to negativity when they're not with their own personal people. So if you're an outsider and you go into this crew, you're going to see a negative mindset, because that's what they're going to talk about, is how negative it is. When you're on overtime, you're going to see that, and they're going to talk about how negative it is. When there's a gathering, a party, a picnic, whatever it might be, or training event, when you have multiple crews that get together, those multiple crews get together, and what do they tell each other? They tell each other how bad it is at their station. Even though individually at their station, they're in a great mood and they're talking about great things. And one of the lieutenants actually that I was interviewing came up with a great term that I absolutely love, and I use throughout my dissertation, which is social morale, which is basically the morale is based on who you are with and what the group is, that group think aspect of it. So there's actually a theory that that applies to this, which is called the contagion theory. And this contagion theory basically says that when not the first person has a mindset of something or a behavior or an attitude or anything else, but when that first person now gets a second person falling in line with it, that it becomes a contagion and it begins to spread throughout the entire organization. And we talked a little bit about it on the positivity aspect. We talked a little bit about it on the negativity aspect when I was talking about the negativity spiral, right? But this theory says that once one person exhibits a behavior and then somebody else catches on to it, others are likely to begin following that. And they use this a lot in police work and like riot control, in which they'll watch a large group of protesters that are together, and they'll watch for the one person that begins to agitate it a little bit more and get it sped up a little bit more. And when that first person goes and starts throwing a brick through the window or lighting a car on fire, that's a problem, and they need to stop that immediately. But what's the bigger problem is when the second person joins in. Once you have the second person that joins in, now you have your patient zero, and now it's beginning to spread. And the more and more people that you have that fall in line with this, the faster it's going to spread through the organization. So going back to that, and what we can utilize to fix this is really monitoring what's happening and stopping it before it spreads out of control. And this is where leadership really takes over. Leadership is the one that has the ability and the influence to kind of squash that negativity, right? From an organizational standpoint, we also have ways of kind of fixing things as well. So going back to the social morale issue, we have what we call micro and macro cultures. The micro culture is basically the culture of the individual crew. And this could be as small as a 2-person crew, depending on what organization you work in, what industry, what type of business or whatever it may be. And then you have your macro culture. The macro culture is the entire organization. And this goes back to anything, any type of organization. Like I said, we could relate this back to a church and say that you have a microculture of your small group or even the individual family. And then the macro culture of the church is the entire church congregation, the entire church body. Fire department, a crew is our microculture. The macro culture is the entire department. The military, you have your individual platoon. Then you have the entire battalion or the entire army, whatever it may be. So that's the difference between the micro and macro culture. And that's where we started. Like I said, we started seeing that really big separation where the micro culture would be phenomenal and the macro culture would be terrible, based on the fact that everybody wanted to go straight to negativity as, for lack of better terms, their default setting. Their default setting when they were discussing things and when they were talking to each other is, we'll start out negative, and then if they start to have that conversation and they start finding common ground that's positive, all of a sudden they would go that positive route. But initially beginning, they assume that everyone wants to hear negative. They assume that everybody wants to hear the bad things going on. And I hate to say this because it's a horrible reality that occurs. But we see this a lot too in marriages and in relationships. We see this a lot with when you get a group of people together and you're separated from your spouse and, all the men are talking. Well, what is the first thing the men start saying? Well, the men start talking about the things that they can't stand about their wives. Oh, my wife does this. She does this. Oh, she shops on Amazon. She does, all the bad things that they might perceive, because they assume that that's the direct route that everybody else wants. That's what they all want to hear. They all want to hear how bad everybody's lives is, right? The women do the same thing. They talk about how bad their husbands are. Oh, my husband sits around all day, does nothing. He sits on the couch and drinks beer, whatever it may be. Instead of going directly to the positive mindset. And like I said, it's an unfortunate reality, but that's something that does occur, and we see that a lot. There's a marriage group that me and my wife are a part of, and it's a church group, and we discuss all kinds of fun things about marriage and everything. But that's one thing that we see a lot, and we try to correct a lot. So how do we make that positive mindset? How do we encourage it? How do we empower that positive mindset? And more importantly, a positive environment for learning and leading. So to circle all the way back to the beginning, I talked about the sermon and about thinking of the 3 things that you're grateful for. And I talked about that study that involved the instructors and the positivity of the instructors and how it impacted the students, right? And it's not necessarily that it's just through the contagion effect or through the contagion theory of saying, well, the instructor was really positive, therefore the students saw that and they caught on and became positive as well. Because that specific study was done on a one-way teaching that was primarily online, which means those students didn't get to see the reactions of the other students watching that video, which means that contagion theory doesn't really align with that, because we have the one person, which is our instructor, but we never get the second person to catch on to really create that contagion flow and that spread, right? So why is it that they were able to create such successful outcomes in their learning? And one of the reasons is because they created an environment that was positive. Not only did the student hear positive affirmations and positive words and tones and everything like that, was engaged, and you had the enthusiastic instructor, but on top of that, the environment itself was one in which they wanted to learn and they were happy with it. And that's kind of goes back to the three things you're grateful for introduction that I use for that sermon, as well as for a lot of the classes I teach, is it creates that mindset within your head of, now I'm happy, I'm in a positive mindset because I thought about three things that are good in my life. So even if I did have the flat tire and the stub toe and I got fired, now I've reset my mind of thinking and said, okay, what three things am I grateful for and am I happy about? But the other aspect of that is, it wasn't just the one person that did that. Everybody in the room does that now. So everybody is in that positive environment, that positive mindset, to be able to start creating a positive leading and learning environment. So let's look at the environment aspect now. We talked a little bit about how to build the individual or the collective group's mindset into a positive direction. But what about the actual physical environment? And there's a study that was done, and I don't even know how long ago the study was, and it's actually a really, really common one. And I apologize, I should have researched it. But the study was basically, it was on factory workers, right? They were in an industrial area, they were in a factory, and they adjusted things that were very, very simple, like the music that was being played behind or in the background, the level of lighting, how bright it was or how dim it was. And they were able to see that based on these environmental factors, they were able to actually change the positivity or negativity of the entire workforce. Their morale was affected by this, right? So one of the things that we have to think about as leaders is, are we creating that positive environment? And I am the biggest proponent of something that I use it almost daily at work, where I just talk about using frequent and focused collisions. And when I say frequent and focused collisions, what I mean is, collisions are basically when two people meet up, they collide, right? And those collisions always lead to some sort of conversation, some sort of interaction, depending on what the relationship is between the two people. It could be something as simple as, hey, how are you doing today, right? That's a nice little icebreaker, random conversation that you would have with basically anybody, or a random sentence that you'd have with anybody. But a lot of times those branch into deeper conversations. So when we're trying to have those focused and frequent collisions, if we create an environment where that actually can occur, then we're in good shape. We're now not necessarily forcing, but we're encouraging the discussions in those relationships to grow. So going back to how we utilize that and create that positive environment that allows for those collisions, first and foremost, we got to get rid of the mindset that everything is done through the phone, through text message or through phone calls or anything like that, or worse yet, emails. We have to get back to that face-to-face conversations and that face-to-face interaction. And that again goes back to those collisions. So right now we're looking at building fire stations. And one of the things that we're looking at within those fire stations is the layout of the building, how our bunk rooms are going to be, how the day room is going to be, the kitchen, everything else. And after the discussion with the architects, the fire chief, the rest of the senior staff and everything, we came up with the idea that basically we wanted the kitchen and the day room to just be one gigantic large room. There may be like little sections where, like, the recliners are in one area, the kitchen tables in another area, but everyone will be primarily in this big room together the majority of the time. The bunk rooms are individual rooms for privacy, for security, for comfort and everything like that. However, one of the things that we made sure that we looked into was we didn't want to have TVs in every single room. I didn't want to have little mini fridges in every single room, because I know that the guys and the girls at the fire station are going to treat that as little condos, as little apartments. And all of a sudden, you're going to have people that go check out their truck, do their training for the day, and then go hide in their room all day long by themselves and isolate themselves, playing on their phone and watching TV. And we don't want that. We want to build up that camaraderie and that culture and have those frequent collisions in order for them to learn about each other, to build up, and for that contagion theory to actually take effect, but in a positive manner, where that positivity that's being set by leadership is now constantly being spread throughout the crew, because they're always colliding with each other and they're always having that interaction, right? The rest of the environment, we want to have so that it is a comfortable place to work, it is a positive place to work. Lots of lighting, lots of things that make people want to actually come to work and be productive, rather than having to deal with headache after headache after headache, which creates that, again, negativity spiral. So other things that we can do through policy, through reduction of bureaucratic red tape, things like that that can make our lives easier and make the crew's lives easier, is going to lead to those positivity contagion spreading throughout your organization. So even though we can't control what people do, we can't control what people think, we can't control how people behave, we can set that good example and lead by example, and we can impact the actual environment of where our guys and girls are working to create an environment that's positive and that's encouraging for them to have that positive mindset and that growth mindset, and be able to say, okay, this is somewhere I want to work. This is somewhere that is very positive for me. This is something that's very encouraging for me. And then again, going back to what we were talking about before and the negativity aspect of it with the nurses, just like they were able to spread how bad an organization was based on just some conversations, we can do the opposite now. Now we're creating an environment and a culture that's so positive that people can't shut up about it. They want to go tell their neighbor how great the organization is that they work for. They want to get on podcasts like this and talk about how great their department is. That's what we're looking for. And that's the kind of positivity that we're able to create as leaders, utilizing that contagion method, utilizing the environmental changes to our actual workplace in order to make it so that it's that much better. So again, going back and recapping, our positivity and our negativity and our mindset and our behavior is 100% contagious. It does spread from person to person. And for whatever reason, the majority of us as humans have this desire and this default setting that when we start talking to someone we don't know, or we start talking to someone who's not a part of our individual group or family, the first thing we want to do is bring up negative things and then transition to positive. So being able to recognize that and be aware of that and start the opposite way and start positive and hopefully end positive is going to be a game changer for creating that positive work environment and that culture. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I hope you got something out of this. Please feel free to visit our website, unbrandedleadership.com. Give us a contact there. Contact us. Let us know if there's anybody that you want us to have on the podcast. If there's anything that you did get out of this, any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or the Spotify podcast account, and we will see you next time. Thank you, guys. Get to work.